Yes, the rumors and what you've heard is true. Dialyn really is just one of the best agents we've ever seen. Everything about her, from her character design to her kit, and even how she affects everything we know about ZenlessZoneZero is crazy, but make no mistake, there's a lot to unpack and talk about when it comes to her, including her value and whether or not she's worth pulling for. Before we begin though, a quick reminder, as all footage shown is from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change, but if you found today's video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. With this out of the way though, let's break down everything you need to know about Dialyn, one of ZenlessZoneZero's strongest characters ever. Despite seeming like a much different stun agent, Dialyn's kit functions somewhat similarly to others in concept because so much of her value comes from how frequently she can fire off her EX special, defensive assist, and use her ultimate at the correct time. With this, her gameplay revolves around 4 main goals: build stun, convert her chain attack into an ultimate, apply debuffs with her paper strike to the enemy, and buff the team. She accomplishes all, thankfully, just by simply performing the previously mentioned special, assist, and ultimate. But this doesn't just affect how she plays, it also affects how she's built and how you approach her as an agent. What makes her stand out though is that unlike typical stunners, Dialyn can use her EX special several times in rapid succession due to its unusually low energy cost, and this is what enables the enemy's stun duration and their stun damage taken multiplier to be increased too. This naturally shapes how she's built, making an energy regen 6 slot far more valuable than on other agents, even as an agent that you'd otherwise think would only want impact on 6 slot. However, none of this compares to how influential her chain attack transforming into an ultimate is, and this is a mechanic that will genuinely change how you play your entire team. Let's start now by breaking down Dialyn's kit though. Similar to the recently rerun Jafufu, Dialyn also technically has 2 unique mechanics to handle. The first is shown beneath her HP and energy, known as positive reviews, and shown through a bar, and this generates passively during combat. Once she has enough, they're consumed to upgrade the next character's chain attack into an ultimate. The second resource, customer complaint, enables Dialyn to unleash a special attack and will also trigger a quick assist, which will then let another DPS come onto field. Dialyn's core passive immediately grants her 60 positive review points out of a max of 120 upon entering the field, and this allows her to begin building towards her upgraded chain ultimate. She also gains bonus impact based on her crit rate, and more specifically, she gets 2 impact for every 1% above 50 crit rate, up to a maximum of 100 impact, and this gives her strong reason to invest in crit rate, though this was already going to be the case with King of the Summit. Once Dialyn reaches 90 positive reviews though, she can choose then to either consume 60 by triggering a chain attack or a quick assist, and this will then upgrade the next character's chain attack into an ultimate, or alternatively, she can also just consume all 90 for a free ultimate on the spot following a chain prompt. Additionally, whenever her positive reviews hit 90, or whenever an ultimate is triggered through her upgrade effect, she gains 1 customer complaint. Holding the basic attack button while she has a customer complaint lets her activate her EX special attack, Get Lost, and this deals physical damage and instantly triggers a quick assist from the previous character. Next, her EX special rotates in a fixed order of rock, scissors, paper, and the third hit, EX special paper, specifically applies malicious complaint. When an enemy affected by malicious complaint is stunned, their stun duration is extended by 2 seconds, and their stun damage multiplier is increased by 30%. Finally though, Dialyn also builds positive review extremely quickly, and she passively gains 0.6 positive reviews per second, and landing the heavy portion of her EX specials will grant her an additional 7.5. Her additional ability activates when there's an attack or rupture agent on the team, so you can't pair her with Miyabi, but Dialyn specifically gains a 50% crit damage increase, and whenever she uses her EX special or ultimate, the squad receives the overwhelmingly positive effect, granting a 40% damage boost. If this effect is already active and Dialyn uses another EX special while its remaining duration is below 35 seconds, the effect's duration is extended by 10 seconds. Additionally, the heavy hit of Dialyn's EX special deals bonus damage based on the previously mentioned character's specialty, and this means that if the previous character paired is an attack agent, the EX special will then deal damage equivalent to 320% of the character's attack. However, if the previous agent is a rupture character instead, the damage scales with 400% of that agent's sheer force in place of it. Dialyn's basic attack is a 4-hit combo that deals physical damage, but if you press her basic attack after using her EX special, this will perform a 2-hit follow-up attack combo, though this isn't necessarily as relevant compared to the rest of her kit. Moving on, Dialyn's special attack is what we need to focus on instead. This is one of the most unique abilities visually and functionally in ZenlessZoneZero, as this has 2 important features tied to it. First, when she has enough energy, pressing the EX special input will unleash a rock, scissors, then paper attack in this exact order, but depending on her resource meter, holding down her basic button will allow her to perform a free ultimate, though it does cost more at 90 as opposed to a chain into ultimate transformation at 60. Overall, it's one of the most unique and powerful mechanics ever added to ZenlessZoneZero, and that's really not even an exaggeration. Dialyn's assist and dodge do have a small feature added to each, though they aren't necessarily necessarily insane or game-changing. Both can be used to skip the 4th hit of her basic attack through a dodge counter or an assist follow-up, and this offers a minor shortcut in her kit should you find yourself doing either. Next, Dialyn's chain attacks are decent but not insane, as they don't offer significant DPS or are better than most other DPSs instead. Lastly, Dialyn's ultimate has her dash forward and deal a significant amount of daze, and this can be followed with the 4th hit of her basic, just like with other abilities. In addition to this, just like with her chain attack, her ultimate doesn't offer anything super insane or unique, but instead it just acts as a sizable burst of daze for the team. For Dialyn's skill priority, you can start by upgrading her core skill, followed by her EX special, as both are important for her, but after this you can level her ultimate, followed by her assist. Finally though, her basic attack can be upgraded for extra value, while her dodge is the least impactful, but can still be leveled if you want to fully min-max her stun potential. Now fortunately or unfortunately, there really isn't much to Dialyn's combos, as the main way she's played simply involves using her EX special to maximize her positive review / unique resource meter, and then swap to other DPS agents or supportive cast members to then use their abilities and eventually build daze. As a result, here are a few tips involving Dialyn and some scenarios that I found myself in to give a better idea of how she plays. To start things off, Dialyn may seem like a primarily on-field stun agent with her using her EX special frequently, but as she doesn't really generate enough energy or deal enough impact with her basics on field to justify being there, her first gameplay goal is to use as much energy as possible, then swap off. Next, though she isn't necessarily on the field often, she does still have great value from performing defensive assists, as this is one of her better methods of applying daze against enemies. That said, in case you were curious, Dialyn's combo starts by pressing her EX special 3 times, and that's it. Following this, you'll swap off to another agent who can preferably stun, deal damage on field, or make better use of the on-field presence. After this though, you'll occasionally swap Dialyn back onto field through defensive assists until the enemy is dazed. Once dazed, you do have 2 options for Dialyn before swapping off to another agent, but one is less complex and more generally usable, so I'll be recommending this instead. The first option is to simply activate the stun window with a non-Dialyn agent, activate Dialyn's chain attack, and then consume these 60 positive reviews for a free ultimate. The alternative to this, unfortunately, is a much more complicated and case-by-case rotation, where the amount of positive reviews that Dialyn has during each part of the fight will affect whether it's even possible, but this is a lot of optimization and specific fight tuning that changes even more depending on which mindscape that you have. Now, of course, there are optimizations to this, and the possibilities are endless if your goal is to min-max your DPS. However, because of the reactive nature of ZenlessZoneZero and the fights being very different from one another with different stun thresholds and mechanics to affect gameplay, the combo that I previously mentioned is a pretty good starting point. Since this combo is fairly basic though, I did want to include a few experiences I had from my time testing Dialyn. First, I did find myself running out of time to fit all EX specials, ultimates, and extra DPS abilities in some cases with Dialyn's new mechanic, and as a result, pre-optimization, I did find much better success and more comfortable gameplay from using some of my resources before a stun window began, especially if I wasn't playing with manual chain on. This was especially the case for characters like SoldierZero Ambi and Evelyn, where fitting chain attacks, special attack casts, or ultimate felt difficult, especially without theory crafting additional approaches to each team and fight. However, to be even more specific than this, SoldierZero Ambi in particular felt more difficult to fit additional attacks in with, as their 3 special combo animation length alongside the recently updated extra follow-up attack animation didn't feel as simple to fit into a normal stun rotation. As a reminder though, this was just my personal anecdotal experience, and I'm sure there are optimizations to make this fit better. I just wanted to share some of my findings and experiences though. Moving along to her build, let's start now by talking about her W engine options. Yesterday calls, to no surprise, is definitely Dialyn's best option, and this increases her crit rate by 24% and is especially helpful considering her kit's need for crit rate to provide impact. Additionally, this gives her 1.5 energy regen while she's off field, and each time Dialyn uses her EX special to deal physical damage, she gains a 9% daze increase, stacking up to 3 times. Once at full stack, the whole team gains a 30% increase to crit damage, and there's really not much else to say. A signature released with a new limited character is always better than other options, though I think it's especially relevant to mention that it does also provide her an important main stat to help with her build. Hellfire Gears and Blazing Laurel are also strong options for alternatives, and both have useful passives, though there are some limitations to this. Hellfire Gears provides a 0.6 energy regen while she's off field, and whenever Dialyn uses an EX special, her impact increases by an additional 10%, stacking up to 2 times. Blazing Laurel, on the other hand, provides 25% impact increase when Dialyn enters the field using Quick Assist or Perfect Assist, and on top of this, performing basic attacks with this engine will apply Wilt for up to 30 stacks. For every Wilt applied to the target, the crit damage of ice and fire damage will increase by 1.5%, and while it does also lack the valuable crit rate main stat, it does still work as a reliable and effective substitute, especially if you're pairing said engine with an ice or fire DPS. Overall though, Hellfire Gears and Blazing Laurel are 21 and 18% worse than her signature respectively. As for free-to-play / more accessible options, Steam Oven is a great choice too. It increases Dialyn's energy regen by 50%, and for every 10 energy that she consumes, her impact increases by 2, stacking up to 8 times for 8 seconds. Since this engine is craftable and fully free-to-play though, it's a reliable and practical choice for the majority of players, though it is simultaneously 27% worse than her signature. Precious Fossilized Core is another free-to-play option, providing a useful 15% impact as its main stat, and with this, its passive is also helpful too, increasing days by 10% when the enemy is above 50% and otherwise doubling to 20% if they're above 75% HP. Now with this engine, its performance is more dependent on when you choose to use it and what threshold you'll be using it against when relying on its days passive, but on average this ends up being only 25% worse than her signature, which is great. Without question though, King of the Summit is Dialyn's best in slot drive disc option, granting 6% days for its 2-piece effect and having an extremely valuable 4-piece passive. This effect will grant a 15% crit damage buff to the whole squad when she uses an EX special or when she uses a chain attack, and if Dialyn's crit rate is above 50%, which she'll definitely be focusing on having anyway, this buff will double to 30% crit damage. For her 2-piece sets, Dialyn has plenty of flexibility, but her top choices are Moonlit Lullaby or Swing Jazz, with both offering increased energy regen, and this is ideal for her since she frequently uses her EX specials. She can also benefit from Woodpecker, which grants an extra 8% crit rate boost to meet her crit requirements, but lastly, Shockstar Disco is another viable option, providing a 6% increase to her impact. Lastly, as for main stats, you'll want crit rate on 4th slot, physical damage, pen ratio, or attack on 5th, and finally energy regen ideally, but also technically impact is usable on 6th slot depending on your Mindscape or W engine choices. As for an ideal stat line though, you'll be aiming for roughly 2000 attack, 90 to 100 crit rate, and as much crit damage as possible, though ideally 100 if that's realistic given your roles. Now let's move to Dialyn's teams. As a quick reminder, I have a whole video dedicated to this section, though I did want to summarize and give some direct examples of findings and results that I had when testing Dialyn. I did also want to quickly re-emphasize though that not all results and testing is shown here, and if you're interested in this instead, you can view all findings on my Discord at discord.gg/Kana. With her having recently been released though, you may be curious about how powerful Dialyn Lucia Yidhari is, and good news, this team is actually pretty crazy, especially against enemies that have low health pools. Performance-wise, she had 38-second clears and also achieved around 43,500 points in Deadly Assault, but even in terms of play, this lineup as opposed to some of the other hands-free, off-field teams definitely felt more comfortable to play. On the topic of Rupture agents, however, Dialyn Lucia Yixuan was actually the best performing team across all metrics, clearing in 40 seconds and accounting for a higher Deadly Assault score of 47,000 points, but now to be honest, I had originally expected an attack agent to be one of the best pairs for Dialyn since a Rupture support with Lucia had already been recently released. To my surprise though, both Yixuan and the Rupture agents as a whole were much more higher performing compared to attack agents, which was both a good and bad thing. The good from this was that Yidhari and Yixuan now both technically have access to a fantastic stun option, even if multiple sides of a Deadly Assault ask for a Rupture agent, but the bad of course here is that attack agents are still lacking in the stun department, though they did recently have Orphe and Seed introduced as good additions, with Lighter and Trigger however still being decent for attack agents overall. Moving to attack agents though, Hugo cleared in 50 seconds and received a solid 33,800 points in Deadly Assault. Now while the element typing of these marionettes certainly helped him achieve this score, it is still worth mentioning that the movement and attack frequency of said boss was sometimes annoying for Hugo's normal game plan. Finding the time to use Charge Shot while avoiding enemy hits was definitely less comfortable than he'd prefer, but thankfully with Dialyn's EX special attack spam, Lighter was able to fill his unique resource and daze the boss at an even higher pace, which was one of the ways that Hugo was able to avoid the annoying playstyle. Seed was the other notable and highest performing attack-based DPS with a 43-second clear and a 33,200 point Deadly Assault score, but now in fairness to Seed, and as you may be curious about regarding Hugo, she is definitely competitive to the likes of Hugo as she specifically lacked an element advantage where Hugo gained one, but as there wasn't an electric weak boss to test Seed Dialyn on, the team was solid but not enough to break into Yidhari Yixuan's category in terms of score. As a side note though, it was also slightly more difficult to plan, time, and execute some of Seed's optimizations as they do normally require a way better understanding of your team compared to other DPS, but as usual, or technically not I guess with how much anti-ice there has been, our favorite DPS Miyabi also performed well with a 49-second clear and a solid 30,000 score in Deadly Assault. Now a decent score would normally be expected here since the enemies didn't have an inherent minus 5 billion anomaly buildup rate, and also because the enemy was freezable for the first time in like a year, but even in terms of play, I found this lineup to be one of my favorites as using something like 3 to 4 ultimate / enhanced basic attacks in a row is really satisfying. That said, Dialyn is also a less on-field focused character, meaning that Miyabi and Yuzuha were able to generate more resources and thereby deal more damage damage. As a side note to this, Yuzuha also being physical helped as well, since the added ability to apply a physical anomaly quicker only increases the rate at which the boss is stunned. Now at this point I'd also normally move on, but I do also have to include the disclaimer that the Miyabi Yuzuha team that I listed didn't even have Dialyn's additional ability active, and this was a huge loss of potential DPS. Now clearly they didn't want Miyabi and a supercharged Yuzuha to take advantage of an insane steroid like Dialyn and make every boss in the game explode, but even without this the team was still decent, especially when using Dialyn for her ultimate spam. Now regarding free-to-play options, Dialyn Panyenhu Minato cleared in 67 seconds and was just near passing Deadly Assault with 20,000 points. That said, the team was still very interesting to say the least, as Minato didn't feel extremely comfortable to play without an agent like Lucia, but at the same time being able to use a secondary Rupture team using an A-rank support like Panyenhu and an A-rank DPS like Minato is still pretty noteworthy. As a final note though, these changes are before and without accounting for any potential changes coming in the future, though we have seen and I acknowledge that version 2.5 and the recent dev talk from Hoyoverse have indicated the potential for older agents to be buffed. With this, the performance of standard characters especially will be low compared to what they may be in the future, but as we have no concrete information on what this will be, stay tuned for an update once we know more. Now let's break down Dialyn's Mindscapes. Her first Mindscape increases positive reviews gained passively and by using her EX specials by 16%, and on top of this, the overwhelmingly positive effect ignores 15% of all attribute resistance. Next, her M2 will increase the stun damage multiplier by another 20%, and the squad deals 15% more damage to enemies if they're under the malicious compliant effect, but as we move to her fourth Mindscape, this will increase her own personal attack by 500 once again when she's under the overwhelmingly positive effect. She also gains 20 energy upon entering combat, but in addition to this, she also gains 20 energy upon entering combat. Regarding her sixth Mindscape, when a squad member enters the field through an ultimate using Dialyn's core passive, they will then gain the Aftertone effect. With this effect, landing an attack will cause Dialyn to deal extra physical damage equal to 480% of her attack, and as an added bonus, however, this attack is counted as EX special damage. Overall, her first and second Mindscapes account for a rough 11 and 16% damage bonus respectively, but the two are also more focused on buffing the team and improving her own functionality, where the later fourth and sixth Mindscapes are more focused on her personal damage. With this, if you're looking to choose between M1 and her signature, I definitely say her signature is more worthwhile, but if you're looking to build Dialyn as a sub or main DPS, you should be focusing on her M4 or her M6. Now let's move to Dialyn's pros and cons. As for her pros, she's a great stunner that provides buffs and debuffs for the entire team, and on top of this, more specifically, the ability to increase the duration of stun is always insane. To add to this, her unique mechanic that turns chains into ultimates has infinite potential and value for the future. Even aside from the actual value of this, she's pretty easy to learn and play, though she of course still has the infinite skill ceiling as I just mentioned. Finally, in terms of her own personal damage, it's actually pretty decent because of her scaling, but as we move to cons, she does need a lot of crit rate rolls to maximize the free impact given, and in addition to this, she is pretty energy dependent and otherwise kind of plays more like an off-field agent as opposed to an on-field one, which may feel worse if you want to see more of Dialyn on-field. However, finally, as I've seen from the comment section in the past, I did see that some of you were curious about how Dialyn compares to characters or teams from the past, and with this, I ran additional tests with old teams featuring limited stunners like Lighter, Jafufu, or Trigger to name a few. The goal here though was to see how much Dialyn had added to my score compared to other limited stunners of the past in the same teams. From my findings, Dialyn's performance was very much dependent on the boss and the team lineup used. Overall, even when testing with other agents like Seed, Harumasa, or Minato, the results were mixed or an uncontrollable factor like only being able to fight marionettes and not one of the other ideal stun-based fights like Typhon definitely skewed performances. But that said, I do believe her average performance to be decently worth it, as adding several thousand extra points to some of the most common teams is valuable. That's going to be it for today's video though, guys. Dialyn is definitely one of the craziest characters that we've seen thus far, and though not every combination or optimization for Dialyn has been found yet, she will certainly shake up the game in a meaningful way. For those of you interested in Rupture or Attack agents, I would highly recommend pulling for Dialyn, as she really does offer a lot to said teams. But thanks again for watching though, guys. Stay safe, stay healthy, good night.